So thank you all for joining us today for our webinar on power systems resilience. So first, a couple housekeeping notes. We are recording and we will share this recording and slides after the presentation. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please drop them in the Q&A and we will make sure that we address them for the end of the webinar. With that, I would like to hand it over to Camille, who's going to talk a little bit about NREL, which I am in communications for, about what we do to support EECBG.
Thanks, Julia. Hello and welcome to each of you to the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant webinar series. My name is Camille White. I am a project manager supporting state, local, and tribal communities work at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL. NREL is a national laboratory of the U.S. Department of Energy. It is one of 17 national laboratories across the United States. As the name implies, we focus almost exclusively on renewable energy and energy conservation. We provide tools, data, TA platforms, research, training, facilitation, and more. Our TA programs integrate research, support deployment, and increase practical application through decision support for state, local, and tribal governments. Our research spans specific renewable energy technologies and technical analysis, as well as finance, social science, economics, environmental impacts, policy, and planning. We have 3 campuses, 2 in Colorado and 1 in Fairbanks, Alaska, plus our office in Washington, D.C. You're welcome to visit us and learn from our living laboratory. NREL supports communities applying to access their EECBG formula funds. We're here to provide peer feedback or co-develop your energy efficiency and conservation strategy. Strategy documents are required with your EECBG applications. Our program provides up to 20 hours of free technical assistance to answer your questions on creating or strengthening your community's strategy. We're excited about today's webinar on power systems resilience. This webinar will help local decision makers and practitioners understand how well-planned power systems can withstand and recover from disruptive events, how mitigation can minimize outages, and understand the importance of resilience of power systems. Thank you for attending and enjoy the session.
Thanks, Camille. All right, and now I'm going to hand it over to Skep, who's going to give a few updates for you all.
All right, hi everyone. I'm Alex. I'm on the EECBG Technical Assistance team. Let me take a moment to share my screen briefly. I think this should be working. Just give me one moment. Can everybody see my screen? Is this working right?
We see the non-presentation mode.
I see. Let's see. There we go. Is that looking better for everybody?
Not yet anyway. It still looks like I can see the 4 summary slides on the left.
Okay, sorry everyone for tech issues. How about now?
It's fine. It's the same, but it looks fine.
Okay. We'll just go ahead and move forward with this. Okay. All right. So hi, everyone. Again, I'm Alex. I'm on the EECBG Technical Assistance team. As was mentioned by Camille, this webinar is part of the EECBG program, more specifically the Blueprint Cohorts Initiative. So just want to take 5 to 10 minutes today to run through some EECBG program reminders and announcements and updates. So I'll start us off with a couple slides and I'll hand it over to my colleague Odette, who's going to wrap up with a really especially exciting announcement for today. So first set of reminders, just as usual, is our upcoming application deadlines. For local governments, that application deadline is October 31st, 2024. And for tribes, that application deadline is May 31st, 2025. You don't have to wait to the deadline to submit. We're accepting applications on a rolling basis. So the sooner you get your applications to us, the sooner we can get you, your grant funds or voucher. In addition to upcoming deadlines, we also have some upcoming program events. First is a reporting webinar for those who are utilizing the equipment rebate voucher. This event will take place on May 30th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And this will really just cover the basics of the reporting process for equipment rebate voucher recipients. So it is not for entities pursuing a technical assistance voucher or for entities pursuing a traditional grant. Just wanted to make that clear. It will be recorded. There'll be time for Q&A. So really encourage those doing the equipment rebate voucher to attend that session. You can easily find the link on the EECBG program webpage. I also wanted to remind you all of our regular office hours that we host. These happen every other Friday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern and are just a great opportunity for you all to get your questions answered live from an EECBG staff member about your application or your project. So the next office hour session is tomorrow, but there's another one on June 7th. And you can really easily sign up via a Microsoft form that we'll be able to drop into the chat in a little bit. And the last event I wanted to mention is the Blueprint cohort event for June. And the theme is Justice 40. So this session will kind of dive into the core pillars of energy justice, look at them through the lens of Justice 40 implementation, and provide some practical strategies for embedding these principles into various clean energy projects. And that event is on June 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Lastly, there's a few other opportunities I'd like to share with you all. The first is Community Sparking Investment in Transformative Energy, or CSITE, funding opportunity announcement deadline, which is May 31st, 2024. And this funding opportunity sets aside about $18 million in financial awards and technical assistance to advance community identified energy priorities, which kind of span across a whole range of technology areas. Specifically, this application and this opportunity is open to federally recognized tribes and local governments that are small to medium in size, or their energy communities, or they're disadvantaged, according to the Climate and Economic Justice screening tool. And again, the deadline to submit an application for this program is May 31st. Next, we wanted to share that the application submissions for the 2024 program year of the Low Income Communities Bonus Credit Program is going to open on May 28th, 2024. So just in a few days now, I guess. And this bonus credit provides either a 10 or 20% increase to the investment tax credit for qualified solar and wind energy facilities. So if you're looking to take advantage of the ITC credit and think you might qualify for the Low Income Communities Bonus Credit Program, really encourage you to look into that program. Check out, they just did an informational webinar this last week. So check that out and be ready to submit your application because it's an initial 30-day application window that will open on May 28th. So I encourage you all to check that out. Last two announcements are ones we share on a regular basis, but want to keep highlighting them. First up is the Energy Savings Performance Contracting Campaign, and that's just a technical assistance opportunity that helps communities and other stakeholders kind of expand an existing energy savings performance contracting program or project, or start up a new one. So for everyone who's interested maybe in Blueprint 2B, we encourage folks to sign up for that campaign. And then lastly, there's an Energy Efficiency Finance Foundations training that's happening this summer. It's hosted by Berkeley Lab, and it's targeted for public sector staff to kind of learn to navigate finance speak in the context of building retrofits. So those interested in Blueprint 5, focused on financing, or 2A, focused on energy audits and building upgrades, we encourage you guys to take a look at that opportunity as well. I think the first event they're hosting is going to be on June 20th. All right, one additional reminder is that if you haven't already, please consider signing up for Blueprint cohort. You might already be signed up, but if you're not, this kind of sign up form is how we're getting everyone's information so that we can share key information about upcoming Blueprint cohort events, EECBG program updates, other federal funding and technical assistance opportunities, and other opportunities that are maybe specific to a certain Blueprint topic area. So you can sign up for Blueprint cohort via this form on the screen, or you can also just email us at our technical assistance email, and we can make sure you're getting regular updates about how to participate in the Blueprint cohorts. All right, last slide before I turn it over to Odette is just a reminder of your EECBG support system. So this is kind of just where to go if you have specific questions about your application or your project, depending on what your needs are. So if you're have questions about BABA or NEPA, you can reach out to the grants team if you're doing the grants option, or the voucher team if you're doing the vouchers option. If you have questions about technical assistance, like the Blueprint cohorts, you can reach out to us at the technical assistance team. Our email's there on the screen as well. And we also have emails here if you're having issues maybe with different portals that you need to access to submit your application. And again, as Camille mentioned up top, we have the NREL email in case folks are interested in getting support around their energy efficiency conservation strategy. So take note of these, and please do feel free to reach out if you have a question about your application or your project. We're more than happy to help. And with that, I'll turn it over to Odette, who has an exciting announcement, and I'll move into our next slide in a little bit.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Any questions? I know we covered a lot of material there. Feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, so as you know, Alex and I have been leading these EECBG Blueprint cohort meetings along with the help from NREL over the past several months. And we did put out a call to the world to find an organization to help us with this initiative going forward. And we're very happy to announce that we found a wonderful organization that will be helping us with the Blueprint cohorts going forward. So that's ACEEE, or the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. ACEEE will be leading an amazing team of several organizations nationwide who will help us execute these Blueprint cohorts going forward. So we're delighted to announce it and can't wait for them to begin. All of these organizations will be helping all of you in the cohorts, and will be giving us more capacity to dive deeper into each of the different topics. So that will be coming up soon. And I believe Rachel Allen might be on the line from ACEEE if you wanted to say a few words.
I am. Thanks, Odette, for that introduction. Very excited to be introduced to all of you and looking forward to working with you over the next year. You know, we've got a great group of organizations. I'm with the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy. We're leading. We have this group that includes C40 Cities, Elevate, Electrification Coalition, Emerald Cities Collaboratives, all these names that you see here. A lot of experts, subject matter experts on the different topic areas. I'll be more involved with the electric transportation related blueprints, and looking forward to collaborating, answering questions, and developing resources for all of you.
Thanks, Rachel. So that's my announcement. Lots more exciting stuff to come, thanks to ACEEE and the team's help. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask. And with that, we can turn it back over to Julia or Michael. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Odette. All right, so I think Michael's going to go ahead and get his slide shared again. But while he is doing that, I'm going to introduce him. So Michael Ingram is a chief engineer at NREL. He is the principal investigator on multiple DOE-funded research projects supporting grid modernization and renewables integration, including hydropower. He has had multiple FEMA deployments to the U.S. Virgin Islands post-Maria Irma disaster to assess recovery and mitigation readiness. He has also provided technical services to the state of New York with renewable energy interconnection policy and technical requirements, and is responsible for microgrid technical and economic resiliency assessments and concept designs for multiple NASA sites, DOE, and USCG, as well as peer review of others' work in this area. So with that, thank you so much, Michael. And I'm going to drop for everyone a little webinar guide in the chat that kind of condenses all this information really nicely for you to follow along as we go through the presentation.
Thank you, Julia. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Appreciate the introduction. That saves me a minute. Let's move quickly into my outline. So we've kind of handled the welcome and the introductions. I'll give you an overview of the drivers and the needs for power systems resilience, and try to help you to understand your role and how you can respond to the utilities perspective on resilience and reliability. What are the challenges that the utilities face, and how those may impact you at your local community, at your local operations? What are strategies for enhancing resilience, and some additional resources, some additional reading after class, so to speak, and make some time at the end, hopefully, for conclusions and questions. Before we get started too deeply into it, kind of set the context. This slide is from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They publish this information annually. And one of the frightening things to me is if you have a little time to go back and look at the history of this slide, but it's the billion-dollar weather and climate disasters in the United States. But you can go back and look and see how it has changed over time. And as you can see, there are a number of these events and a variety of these types of impacts on resilience in the U.S. Things from storms, but wildfires, and others, cold storms, and so forth. So I would take a moment to ask you to drop into the chat. Were you affected by any of these events? And if you were, did you lose power? Did you lose electrical power? And if so, do you remember for how long? And what were the implications of that? How it affected your operations, your community, even on a personal note. And if these didn't, you probably don't have to look back too far, and you can recall an event where you were affected. So if you would share any information about that in the chat, it would be helpful for everybody to share that. I'll take just a moment. My Zoom skills, I had the chat open before we started all this, and so I'll ask someone on the team to help me monitor that. But I'm sure it's one of the screens that I have open, but I can't see it.
No worries, Michael. Nothing in the chat yet.
All right, everybody's shy.
Oh, here we have a couple. We have a few examples that are just rolling in. Someone said last year storms in the Midwest knocked out power in Bloomington for about 1 day. Others had power out for longer. Someone else said natural disasters in Oklahoma, including tornadoes and severe thunderstorms. And someone else said not Idalia, but Hurricane Ian cost my family power for 3 days.
Yeah, a couple of the surprising ones, Julia, that have happened in the last few years are the cold storm that affected Texas, and then where the utilities there in Texas, due to the cold, there was a convergence of the weather affecting equipment and high demand because Texas wasn't expecting the cold snap, and the thermostats raised and so forth. There was an increase in the power demand, and it resulted in significant outages in Texas. And then a year or two later, almost the same thing happened to the Southeast U.S., but in Tennessee and Alabama. The cold snap wasn't quite as drastic, but there were implications. There were rolling blackouts in Tennessee and some in North Alabama as well. So it's kind of the same thing. So it's interesting how these types of events are growing. Let's go on in. So key takeaways for you that hopefully I get across in this presentation is pretty simple. That a well-planned power system can withstand and recover from disruptive events. That's two important parts there. Disruptions can be natural or they can be man-made, and I'll talk a little bit about those. Mitigations focus on minimizing outages and restoring power quickly. And just for you to kind of think about as we go through this, why is it important for you to understand the resilience of the power systems? How, I set it up with that first slide for you to begin to think about how those events affected you. And so what is the resilience of the power system that you're connected to, and how does it affect you? How can you respond to that? So this slide is an overview, if you will, of what a resilient power system, what are the features of a resilient power system. The utility should use past experiences to inform future decisions. And this is how we all do planning, but in this particular case, understanding what's happened before and taking that forward. And one of the failures that I spoke about with the Texas and the Southeast outage, the Texas event and the Tennessee, North Alabama were very similar. Texas was required to write a report on what happened, kind of an after action. That wasn't well integrated into the actions in the Southeast, and they were almost repeated, those mistakes. So that's an opportunity there. Recognizing alternative ways to use resources. And we're going to talk a little bit about integration of new technologies and how those can help. Well-conceived, constructed, and managed systems, having spare capacity purposefully created to accommodate disruptions, the willingness and ability to adopt alternative strategies in response to changing circumstances. No plan survived contact with the enemy. That's a famous adage. So having practiced your resilience plan and scenarios associated with that, and being flexible ahead of time and being prepared for unexpected directions during an event. Bringing together a range of distinct systems and institutions. We'll talk a little bit about how you can be involved in that utility planning or that community emergency planning. And so recognizing the value of stakeholders and community engagement. Prioritizing broad consultation to create shared ownership and decision making. We talk a little bit about that there. So I'm going to share this as almost the framework for the entire presentation, but I have it in multiple places in the deck and at the very end, but I'm going to walk you through these major steps, not only for how the utility should approach resilience planning, preparation, and operation, but how you can think about your response at whatever level you are at the community level, the county level, state level, campus level. These same sorts of this recipe, if you will, is valuable to you as well as how the utility thinks about this preparation. And like I said, it's in multiple places in the deck, and it's at the very back for sort of as a takeaway. Let's just talk about the first one. So the first step, and I want to offer this because a lot of folks, if you can see my mouse here, want to start kind of here. I have a resilience or reliability problem. I need a microgrid. No, you should start here. Defining drivers and needs. Who is involved? What are their specific requirements? What is their definition of resilience? Is it an hour or is it days of operation if there is no power? How do we restore operation as quickly as possible? Those sorts of questions. Resilience mitigation framework. So at a pretty high level, how do we boil this down? Emerging technologies. I'm at the National Renewable Laboratory, like Camille and Julia, and yes, we are about the technologies, and these can help address both resilience and reliability issues. But encourage you and your partners, as well as the utility, to start with information, not solutions. make data-driven decisions based on a clarity of what you're trying to do and how you're measuring that, and engage multiple stakeholders. You know, the decisions that the utilities make to address these challenges from climate change and you know, even bad actors like you know, cyber threats or physical threats. Those solutions, those approaches will affect multiple stakeholders in the community. And even those things that you may choose to embark on at your local level will have impacts on your community, your neighbors. So you want to set up a resilience hub or multiple business units within your organization. Emphasizing the role of community engagement. I'm probably preaching to the choir, but community involvement is important in building resilient power systems. Prioritize stakeholder consultation to create shared ownership in the decision making. And who should be involved? Individuals, businesses, and local governments all can contribute to the efforts. Energy efficiency and conservation are important for a number of reasons, and I'll talk about some of those, to the response of power systems resilience and local resilience at, you know, at your level. Emergency preparedness, and if you have the opportunity to support infrastructure upgrades and grid modernization, I encourage you to do that, because those things can help improve the resilience and reliability posture of the utility in the face of these challenges. Take a minute, if you can, to think about opportunities that you've seen where you have been able to improve or participate in the resilience posture locally, or even with your utility, whether they've had, you know, a survey about resilience or reliabilities issues, maybe after a storm. Now, how can you act in your own community to promote power systems resilience? I know from several of the technical assistance programs that I'm supporting that resilience hubs are an important and popular activity. So how does, and it may seem obvious, but how does the resilience hub planning overlay with the power systems resilience posture? So kind of starting with that initial step in that framework, identifying the hazards that the resilience hub might face and how it might address those, and make that safety umbrella, if you will, available to those stakeholders in the community. Providing background information on the social vulnerability and the climate impacts. Climate impacts are different depending on what part of the country you're in, whether you're on the coast, whether you're on an island, whether you're subject to winter storms, those sorts of things. And what are those impacts specifically in your neighboring communities? What is the context there? Is it an older community? Is it a poorer community? Is it an energy burdened community? And how can you help? How can the resilience hub improve that during an outage or a resilience event? And seek to align your plan with the best practices, and we can help with that. And we have some information to support that. So some notional hazards, if you will, taken from real projects. None of these are surprises, but some things that we talked a little bit about when I asked the question, had you been affected by these? Snow and ice, windstorms, extreme heat. It's becoming more prevalent, but it can affect the reliability of the power system and may for longer than just a few hours, depending on the extent of the heat storm. Power outages can result from high demand. And so the winter storms that I talked about, a complicating factor was the increased demand, as well as the cold impact on mechanical equipment. It was a kind of a two-edged sword there. Air pollution from frequent wildfires can affect the community and may cause you to activate your resilience hub for a non-power system related type of an event. So if it's a safe harbor, if you will. It may also affect the power supply as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that type of a special event here in a moment. Kind of back to our framework. So evaluating the current operations and risks to your operations, to your location, and identifying those gaps between where you stand now and how you and the risk or the threats that you might face. This may be an oversimplification for some of you that are familiar with how the power system operates, but there's two forms of the grid. And some people might not recognize this, but at the transmission level, the high tension wires that you see crossing the country that carry the bulk of the power, the transmission system, is one piece. And then there's the local grid that you see next to your home on the wooden poles and with the wooden cross arms. That's the distribution system. That's kind of the retail level, and then the transmission is effectively the wholesale level. The transmission looks a lot like this spider web. It's very well interconnected. It has multiple points of connection to itself and to its anchors, if you will. It is subject to bad days. If you can imagine losing, one of those lines or one of those elements of the web, it's not probably noticeable to the rest. As you can see, it remains connected. I take another strand out, and the spider might be angry about that, but it's still connected. The power is able to flow from A to B to C to D, and repairs can continue. But a really bad day from a hurricane or a wildfire or a tornado, and you can have a disconnection between one portion of the grid and the other. And that's, and I'll talk a little bit about it, a couple of personal examples. Why is it like that? Well, this chart here from the DOE's U.S. Energy Information Administration, the EIA, is a map of the transmission in the United States, all of it basically above 69,000 volts. And it looks more like the capillary system of the human body than anything else to me, but it's very well connected. There are a few areas that are vacant, so to speak. You can imagine around population centers, but the eastern U.S. is like the spider web. But you take that to another level, and the very high voltage, it's the super highway, if you will, of the transmission system. But even it, at these extra high voltages that run from 230,000 volts to 735,000 volts, and even high voltage direct current, it's still very interconnected. You can see loops, and it overlays that lower capillary system that I talked about. It's extremely interconnected. So let's talk about the local issue. This is a model of a representation of an actual distribution grid on an island. As you can see here, it's gangly. It's like a starfish almost. And if you cut one arm of it with an outage, with an event, you see that most likely everyone on this feeder would lose power. It kind of works like this in my little animation. The tree falls on the line, and not only does it go dark in this animation red beyond the tree, the event, but it will also track back to the center of that starfish where there's protection. If you've ever opened up the circuit breaker cabinet in your home, this center of this star is effectively very much like that, your circuit breaker cabinet. And so anything that happens on that line or that circuit, that breaker is going to trip, it's going to open, and all the things, all the homes that are represented by these dots will go dark. So I've managed to represent the entire power system in one fuzzy graphic. So at the top of the graphic, for conventional power systems anyway, there's usually a large central power station. There are many of these in the United States, but the power starts here for the most part. It steps up through a transformer, a device that takes the relatively low voltage and high current from that generator, that generation station, and puts it on the highway, the superhighway, to move it as if it were a package from Amazon all the way through until it reaches your outlets, your home, your place of business. There are off ramps, not unlike a highway or an interstate, where it's used by industrial customers, commercial customers, Walmart, or other retail organizations, and neighborhoods and residential customers and so forth. The interesting thing with respect to this topic is, if you think about this as a threat surface or a risk matrix, there are a number of different places that things can happen, can go wrong. The transformers can fail. Storms can take down those towers that suspend the wires, whether they're towers or they're poles at the distribution level. Fires can happen and cause outages in those ways. Things can freeze and fail to work. So in the context of resilience, there's a large area to be concerned about. Why is it important to maintain electric supply during normal and adverse conditions? So these are some of the things to think about from the power systems planning perspective. They normally they have to operate under both conditions as best they can. How can power systems withstand disruptions like extreme weather, cyber attacks, or equipment failures? As climate change and other threats to the power system increase, the traditional modes of planning to simply service the load as it changes throughout the day, and I say simply, it is now having to consider operations during these adverse events or these threats. So given this map, if you will, and all of the opportunities for events to affect it and remove pieces of it from that spider web, what options are available to you to ensure continuity of operations, survivability? If you lose commercial power, what can you do to offset that, to prepare for that? And I sort of hinted at one, a microgrid, but what other things have you put in place to help you with poor reliability or resilience events on the power system.
Battery storage?
Yes. That's an oldie but a goodie. If you've ever had a UPS, an uninterruptible power supply, with your computer, back in the day when you had a desktop tower and not a laptop, that was one of the things that people would invest in, is a UPS. And a battery is a larger version of that to some extent, and it can protect essential or critical systems at your home or at your business. Any other examples? Thank you for that. I'll let you think about that as we move into the slides. Tell a little story about a personal example. For me, I was at the Tennessee Valley Authority for about 28 years, and toward the end of my career, I was an operational specialist to the C-suite, and had the deep breath opportunity to work a storm. There was a tornado outbreak, and there's a lot going on this slide. The orange in the background is essentially the TVA system, the transmission system. The green slide at the or graphic that's sort of overlaid is a representation of the tornado plural outbreak that affected Alabama in April. There was one specific storm or tornado that I'm highlighting here with my cursor. I hope you can see, was an EF5, which is a top level storm. It began in Mississippi, but cut across. Apologize for that. I am going way backwards. That's what I get for touching something. So if I make that map of Alabama a little more transparent, you can see that EF5 passed right over a nuclear plant. But that nuclear plant's very well designed, storm hardened. The trick was that it lost offsite power, it lost transmission, it lost ability to put the power on the interstate, as I talked a little bit about earlier. It couldn't get the power out, so it had to trip. It had to shut down. But that tornado basically knew exactly what TVA's transmission line route was. It followed it and destroyed many miles of it, as you can imagine. And this one that went from northeast Alabama into Mississippi, many pieces of that. And also this trunk that moved up to Nashville as well. So in this table on the left, more than 100 transmission lines were affected, 275 miles of conductor, the pipes that the transmission uses, the wires to transport the energy. 350 structures were damaged, over almost 1.5 million pounds of steel. The bad news, the really bad news, was that the full restoration took 65 days. What was interesting to me in that time was that the initial response from TVA construction was obviously, it was immediate, but it was very effective. Transmission was restored quickly in a number of different areas. It looked like things were going to be back up in a week. And the reason was TVA was tapping warehouses and construction projects that were in motion, so to speak, robbing Peter to pay Paul. But after only a few weeks, or after only about a week, those resources were tapped. And so with 100 transmission lines down, and the amount of damage here, those those warehouses ran out of gas, if you will. And so things slowed down. We were trying to borrow from other utilities that had not been affected by the storms. And if you can imagine, the storms that were on that map, it affected a large portion of the Southeast. So there just wasn't equipment available to borrow. And so then you were into procurement, you're into purchases. And so that took time as well. This slide provides an overview of what I meant was, how can you borrow from your neighbors when your neighbors were also affected? One of the keys that utilities lean into is called a mutual aid agreement. And so when there is a storm, they have agreements already in place with their neighbors to borrow equipment, whether that's like conductors and steel and poles and transformers, or repair equipment like trucks, augers, and things like that, and even staff, linemen can come in. But the extent of this storm is part of the reason it took 65 days. And there sits the Tennessee Valley, right in the middle of the mess of it. Fortunately, everyone in the United States is not affected by tornadoes and doesn't have that experience, hasn't seen it. But weather in itself, the general term of weather, whether it's cold or heat or straight line winds, affects reliability and resilience across the country. And so I bring to, offer this, not to pick on Texas, but the number of weather-related outages is growing and is extensive. It affects almost the entire country. In some areas more, some areas less, but you can kind of get a sense of that. I mentioned wildfires, and it's probably intuitive that a fire can affect the infrastructure of the power system. Fire's bad for almost anything. It can burn down wooden poles. The smoke from the fire can cause the air to be ionized and create a pathway so that the electricity can arc to ground. But one of the relatively new responses is almost in reverse, that the power system can cause a wildfire, can lead to a wildfire. If there is a contact of a tree into a line, that electricity flow over that branch can cause the fire and initiate the fire. So in response to that, in the state of California, they've created this policy called public safety power shutoff. And it's been policy of the state of California for at least a couple of years. And this quote is from one of the utilities there that explains to their customer base what is a PSPS, public safety power shutoff. So I kind of describe it, pardon me, in this recipe. And you need these first three things together, not separate, but high winds, low humidity, and dry vegetation. You have that combination, you have a threat or the potential threat of fire. The utility, at least in California, has the authority to declare a public safety risk and shut down portions or areas of their grid preemptively to prevent or eliminate the risk of wildfire. And things go dark when they do that. So one of my questions to you is, it's primarily a Western states issue because of that recipe. You don't, those first three things are kind of endemic to the West, if you will. Are you familiar with the PSPS? Have you experienced a power safety power safety power shutoff? Does your state have a policy that allows for this? Like I said, I know California does. There are at least 3 states that I know of that do have this. But I wondered if you had any experience with it. If you have, please drop that into the chat.
Alex
You-
said, yes, I'm in California. Lots of shutoffs on high wind days, especially due to fire risk.
Thank you. Thank you. If you live in Colorado, we had a surprise a few weeks ago of a PSPS being declared by one utility here. And I am unaware of an action, but Utah also has a PSPS policy. And there may be others, but those are the 3 that I know about. I mentioned cyber and kind of hit this one at a high level. You know, how does cyber security, how does cyber risk affect the utility? The all capital, bolded, and underscored classic cybersecurity event to affect utility system is Ukraine. If you're not aware of it, if you're not familiar with it, I understand. But I'm a utility guy. I'm a utility nerd. You know, it's part of the handbook, if you will. But it occurred in 2015. And what's so interesting about it, in a dark way, is it was a long game. The attack began 9 months before the power was turned off. So it's very different from the weather events that we talked about. Maybe other than a hurricane. A hurricane, you can see it coming, and it takes a long time for it to get there, and then it happens. And so maybe that is an example. And I'm kind of being a little bit flip about that. But it began with the bad actors introducing some malware through the back door that allowed them to take control of certain key operational systems. Over the course of many months, they mapped the cyber network, but also learned about the transmission, the power system network. So they had physical network as well as cyber network mapping. They understood how things were put together and how each system was controlled and interfaced with the other. On the day of the attack, they launched a denial of service attack on the customer call center. And this was brilliant because most people may not realize this, but even today, utilities are often dependent on customers to call in and say, my power's out. So they have that address, they have that location, they have that customer ID, and they know, well, that's where the power's out. At the distribution level, there's not a lot of observability. There's not a lot of high tech to know that the power isn't flowing out on that starfish. If you go back to that graphic that I showed, they may not know that the power is out at the very end because there's just not the monitoring and the sensing capabilities at that distribution level to know that. So, not in all cases, but in many cases, the utility is dependent on that customer to call. Well, in this case, the terrorist, if you will, shut down the call center and made the utility blind to that aspect. They did some other things that a little bit more technical, but the supervisory control and data acquisition system, you probably heard of SCADA. That's a little bit like the flight control center that the controllers use to manage the airplanes. It's the analogy or the analog of that to the utility, how they move the power through their system. They shut that down or affected its operation, and then they interrupted 230,000 customers. It took 6 hours to restore power, and the thing here is nothing was damaged. No equipment was damaged. It was just operated. It's like a cyber hand reached in and flipped a bunch of switches in that circuit breaker panel that's, you know, in the closet at your house, and didn't tell you about it. They just came into your home and they flipped a bunch of switches and left. And you're like, what happened? At the power systems level, that's what happened in Ukraine. Let's talk a little bit more about the model. Identifying potential solutions. As I said, many people, at least in my experience that I've worked with, like to jump to this. And it's very important, I'll reemphasize, to start with those first two boxes, understanding the drivers and the needs and your requirements, and the operational experience and what those risks and threats are where you are. So, you know, hurricanes are not a problem in the center of Utah, but they are on the Gulf Coast. Typhoons and earthquakes affect other parts of the country. So now, you know what your needs are and you know what your risks are. How do you put those together to develop solutions? Strategies for enhancing resilience. There are various strategies and technologies to improve power system resilience. And here we get into the fun things. Excuse me. Smart grids, microgrids, energy storage, someone mentioned, but also advanced monitoring systems. And I hinted a little bit about this when I said that there was essentially a blindness, a lack of observability from the utility on some of these distribution networks, depending on those phone calls. So advanced monitoring systems can improve the restoration time and the posture for reliability and resilience at the utility. These solutions can help mitigate risk and enhance the ability of the power systems to bounce back from a disruption. They enhance resilience, but the strategies should also consider the larger context that they're operating in. So utility employee safety, customer safety, economy, reliability, and environmental friendliness. You know, things that are installed don't harm the environment, don't otherwise impact reliability. Excuse me. There's things that you can do to the power system that can make it overly complex, that don't take into account those first two steps. You know, say a microgrid. A microgrid is a complex machine, if you will. While we could cut up the power system into many different microgrids, that complexity rather could actually reduce reliability and increase costs if the requirements and the risks don't drive that type of an investment. If you think about that, it's like over-insuring your home under certain situations, over putting snow tires on your car if you live in the desert. You know, maybe those are not the best examples, but that's what I'm trying to convey there with that discussion. Excuse me one second. So one of the things that we used at the utility when I was there was a resilience matrix. And so here on the left, iterating the risks that could be faced. And this list of risks will be different for every utility. There'll be some common themes. There will be some duplication, but there may be some things that aren't shared. But it's important to start with, what are those risks? And you can think about this at the local level too. What are those risks to your operations? How might your business, your resilience hub, your community be affected? And then you step across and you say, okay, what is my mitigation plan to address each of these? And that mitigation plan will include the steps that I've listed here. So assessing how that individual risk could affect your operation. What are the things we can do to address that? Prevention and hardening. You've not started to install any new equipment yet, but what are the things that you could do to prepare ahead of that event? Well, we all talk about for an extended outage, we should have fresh water on hand. We should have, batteries for flashlights. Those are examples of what we mean by prevention and hardening. Those analogies of batteries and water are different at the power systems level and are different at your full business level. I don't know what those are, but you do, and you can kind of begin to think about that. Detection and monitoring. From the utilities perspective, my example with that feeder, I don't know that power line's out because I can't see it. I don't monitor it. I need someone to call and tell me about it. But are there other things that should be detected and monitored at your location? So if you have remote businesses, maybe just a signal that I've lost power at that remote business or that remote operation. Do I need to send somebody to start a generator, to change the configuration at the circuit panel so that the generator can last, the fuel in it can last longer? Those sorts of implications of why you might need detection and monitoring. Operating guides. So I just talked about sending a person to a remote operation. What do they do when they get there? Well, they have this operating guide. They have a check sheet, a document, maybe something on their phone or their tablet that says, here's what you need to do. A, B, C, D. If you see this, then you need to change and do these other things. After the storm or after the event, what do you need to do to get back in full operations? What are the things that you need to reach and get? Are there procurement documents that are prepared? Are there contracts in place for say roof repair or other things like that? Bringing it home to where you are. But those things are important to the utility as well. I talked a little bit about mutual aid and so forth. All of this is great to have in a file cabinet or a folder, of course, but if you don't practice it, like anything else, it's not real. And so drills and integrating it into operations so that it's practiced. We have fire drills at our business. That's an example of these drills and integration into operations.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, yeah, on this slide, is this stuff that the utility would be doing? And if so, how do we know as members of local government, for example, whether our utility is doing a good job of this or not?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. If you're part of the regulatory framework at the state level, the state commission or the energy office can ask the utility to report on these things. What are their mitigation plans? What are their resilience plans? There are certain factors that the utility can be asked to track and trend on reliability. The numbers of outages in a year, the frequency, how often these kinds of outages happen. You can check with the commission to see, are they checking with the utility? But there's, at the local level, if the local government is receiving complaints from the community, the businesses, about poor reliability, or they have a concern about, say, a PSPS or storm season, what is the posture of the utility? The utilities have government relations staff, and they will respond to those local government inquiries about these kinds of things. Can we see your continuity of operations plan, the public version of it? Can we discuss how we might support some of these drills? And the drills can involve some physical activity. Do you need us to change traffic patterns when there's the threat of a storm, as you might want to position equipment. You know that the storm track is going to move through this way. Are you planning to position equipment? Can we support that in any way? Can we change? Can we help you to notify folks in the community? We have an EMA, emergency management office in our county, in our city. Would you like us to post information to it? We have most of the people in our city are members of that. You know, I'm kind of going on, but there are a number of different ways that that integration can happen, and I think that's a really good question. Does that help, Odette?
Yeah, thank you.
This is a little bit of an academic thing, but I want you to kind of think about how might you know that the utility or your mitigation plan or approach made things better. If you think about it, the event is kind of this trapezoid, this red area. So on the x-axis, the horizontal axis is time. On the vertical axis is continuity of operations. How well did your business or the power system survive this event? And anything below that dark line across the center is anything below that is bad. And so the red is outaged. And there's an event that happens, you know, so that spark, if you will. And believe it or not, on a large scale event, it doesn't necessarily go from 100% to zero. It can be handicapped or hamstrung or diminished, and it may take a little while for it to reach the bottom, if you will, the nadir, to use a technical term. And so you have this slope, and then things are settled out. The plans become, they move into the implementation phase, and you have restoration. And then there's sort of the reverse of that might not necessarily follow that same angle of timeline, and it may take longer for it to fully restore than I've kind of shown here with this angle. But this is an example. This is a representation of a graphical representation of a bad day, or how resilience happens. So what does all that mean? Well, if you improve things, does that trapezoid change? And I've kind of talked about the angles and the depths, the durations. Any improvement, whether it's maybe the same time, but it's not as deep. It's not, you know, there's not as much volume, if you will. Is it shorter? You know, what are the things that you could possibly do to change the geometry of that event, of that impact? And that's a kind of an academic way or a graphical way of thinking about it. But your response to an event isn't just binary. There's different ways to attack it, different approaches, and that's what I'm trying to convey with this graphic. So what are some of those, to kind of put a point on that pencil? Planning, hardening, recovery, and survivability. Those are kind of the major topics. And while they may be put in place, planned for, established before the event, that's sort of a line of when they take place or when they're most implemented. So the planning and the hardening, obviously that's before the event. And those are a list of things that fall into those categories. Standards, having system models, these are from a utility perspective. But threat characterization, we've talked a lot about that. Vulnerability assessment, system design, asset design, emergency preparedness. Hardening, again, a utility perspective, but there are things at the local level that describe hardening or that can be examples of hardening. Recovery, having, I talked about my story with TVA and having a significant warehouse of equipment, conductor and steel for towers and bolts and washers and rebar for foundations and all these things. You can only have so much, but planning for that. Mutual assistance, that's a big issue. It's a big piece of the insurance that utilities have, is being able to reach out to their neighbors. You can think about that at the local level. What can you and your neighbors share during an event? The Resilience Hub is kind of the premium example of that. Management of the outage and management of the incident. That's especially important. Talked about traffic patterns and things like that. Survivability. I mentioned energy efficiency. So if you think about, okay, I'm going to put in a battery, someone mentioned that, or a microgrid to help me provide power during an outage. Well, energy efficiency, as you know, drops your total load, your total power requirement. That's a great thing when you're buying power from the utility, but it might be an even greater thing when you're supplying your own energy. So the sizing of that battery is affected by the efficiency or the effectiveness of your energy efficiency programs and investments. And so that you're kind of paying yourself twice for that. Back to my chart.
Michael, for
Yes.
this section, I just want to check in and say that we have probably 10 to 15 minutes left. So just want to make sure that we kind of cover the big points for this section.
Thank you. All right, so kind of getting close to the end, I'm going to walk through these. Developing solutions, and I'm going to block these together. Measurements and kind of an appeal for you to transfer knowledge. And at the very end, I'm going to provide a slide that we will publish this deck, kind of some takeaways and things. Prioritizing solutions, estimating the impact of the solution or the mitigation measure to do the things that you identified up front, reducing the probability of the outage, limiting the impact, and improving the survivability. In bullets, that's my trapezoid. Those are the angles, the distances, the volume, if you will, of that trapezoid. So what did I mean by that? And so those are the things that you need to focus on when you're defining your solution, prioritizing those options. One of the things that people struggle with is resilience and reliability is hard to value, because what are the impacts? What are the costs of that? You know, if I'm doing energy efficiency, I know I'm going to reduce my bill this much, and I can sort of see that payback. How does that work for resilience or reliability? Well, a couple of things that are important there is that there are co-benefits. While the value of the resilience or the reliability itself may be difficult to put a price on, the mitigations that improve it have co-benefits. So on the utility side, those benefits and say are those solutions that affect grid modernization, monitoring, efficiency at the transmission level can improve the bottom line on the T&D system. Similarly, like with energy efficiency, those can improve the bottom line as well as improve the resilience and reliability posture. So appreciate those co-benefits. Talk a little bit about reliability and resilience. These are distinct things, and all I wanted to say on this slide was that they share this process, and I've talked about this process at a high level. There's things that you can do before the event, there's things that you can do during the event, and it's important to have plans in place, equipment in place, procedures in place to restore after the event. One of the solutions that is often overlooked is advanced metering. If you've seen these meters on your home or your business that have this digital readout, that information is close to real time reported back to the utility, which would allow them to know that that one leg of the starfish is out. It has co-benefits, as I mentioned before, these utility use cases that I've listed here. But from a resilience perspective, it has helps with service restoration, event location. So where a tree contacted a power line and took it out, that location could be quickly triangulated from these meters. It helps with operational safety, performance, and can help a developer or you to know how to design a microgrid. This image here probably doesn't resonate with you, but this is a large solar field in the Caribbean. It might not look like it, but this is after a hurricane. And what we found was solar fields that looked like this. And then a few miles down the road, there were solar fields that were largely still operational. Maybe a few solar panels were damaged because of flying debris. And the reasons that these look different are kind of listed here. And I won't get into the technicals of these, but they weren't maintained, they weren't installed properly, they didn't have good foundations, the cabinets weren't waterproof, the washers didn't have locking mechanisms on them. You know, basic things from a construction and operations perspective that were discounted at one location and well maintained or well managed at a different location. My mouse just keeps taking off. I apologize. Physical security. And I would encourage you to kind of look into this if you're interested, is the 2013 attack at the Metcalf substation. This was not a cyber event, but it was another terrorist event where bad actors attacked the station physically. They scoped it out. They attacked the electronic perimeter. They cut cables with axes so that the observability into that station was broken. It was the electronics to it were cut off, and then they attacked the transformers, the large equipment that I mentioned at the top of that map. They damaged those and caused a significant outage. The list here are the things that could be put into place to mitigate against physical attacks: deterrence, detection, assessments, communications, and of course, response plans. These are some of the things that utilities do to protect physical security. But as you install mitigations at your business or in your community, what are those physical security measures that you should put in place to protect that protection? So if you put in a generator, for example, how is it walled off or fenced off so that it can't be damaged? A terrible example, and I was in a community and they were bragging, they were showing me their generator that was parked next to this building, and that all they had to do was come out and punch a button. They had a procedure for doing that. It was tested by the company that loaned it, that leased it to them. I said, well, how is it connected to the building? They said, oh, that's easy. The cable is, the connection is in the cabinet. The cabinet's under lock. We have a separate connection here at the building. And I noticed that it didn't have a lock on it. So I opened the cabinet myself, and the cables that connected to the generator had been copper, and they were stolen. And so there were no cables, and they were unaware that they had been stolen. If they had needed to start the generator, there was no extension cord, so to speak. And so respecting the context of where the equipment sits, whether it's remote or in another situation where it might be damaged or harmed, you think about that from a physical security perspective. Microgrids. My distinction here is to think about whether you need backup generation or whether you need a microgrid. A microgrid is a complex system that requires a lot of maintenance. And in many cases, in some cases anyway, you may just survive with a backup generator. A microgrid can produce energy, put it back onto the grid, but it can, through this device here, isolate and provide energy within that box, within that blue box during an outage. But as you can kind of see in that distinction, there's a lot going on. It's a complicated system. This list here begins to tell the story on how to design that microgrid, your considerations. Yes, it also it provides resilience, but it needs to check those same boxes that I talked about earlier: safety, economy, reliability. It can operate grid tied, meaning that it can provide energy to the grid. The utility is going to be interested in that. They want to be involved. If it's backup generation, you don't have that situation. And so they're going to be less interested in permitting and evaluating those designs. So that's a consideration. This is a list that we use internally to help federal partners to prepare for the design and the planning of a microgrid. Now, these are the kinds of information that are essential to size and position that microgrid, what systems or what critical loads are protected. It may be an entire building, it may be an entire campus, it may just be elements of that or pieces of that. And so we ask for this kind of information. You'll have this to think about as you plan your own microgrid if you're going in that direction. But if you do a procurement, your developer, your engineer, your designer is going to ask for this kind of equipment. And I talk a little bit about in this column why that's important, how that helps the engineer, the developer to properly size that. If they don't ask for this information, you might question the size, the capacity, the duration, the design itself. Because this is important information to have to properly position that equipment to satisfy your requirements and the risks that you're facing. I'm not going to get into this at this point, but this is a chart that was used in New York to begin to position the evaluation of resilience, what mitigations are in place, comparing the cost of those outages in one direction to the cost of the mitigation itself. And so on one of those lines, we've got the cost of the outage, this blue, the light blue. On the dark blue is the cost of the solution, the mitigation, and where they overlap is kind of that optimal. And the meta or the high level is, yes, the longer the event lasts, the more expensive it's going to be to the customers and the clients. Kind of in the opposite way, the faster the utility responds, and to shrink that, the more expensive it's going to be. And so there's a natural trade-off. Where do you want that to be? They use this 90% of customers within a certain period of time to begin to draw that optimal. It's going to look different for every situation. Additional resources, and I'm coming around the bend. I'm not going to talk about these in detail, but they're here for your reading pleasure. This resource is by some close friends of mine here at the lab, and they introduce this model, which is a little bit different, but basically the same, starting with your baseline all the way through to solutions. I would encourage you to take a look at that. I find that a lot of people are interested in just knowing more about cybersecurity. These documents don't dive into the bits and the bytes, but they talk about the plans, the procedures, the policies that you should have in place before you start doing the really technical things. And so if you're interested in that perspective, how to position your business, your operation, your local government, to have the policies in place so that it's unlikely that you'll be attacked by malware or phishing attacks. I would encourage you to look at these. These are the, apologies, Julie.
I'm sorry, Michael.
I was on a
No.
roll and there was a voice. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And we will definitely, we'll share these slides with everybody at the end so that everybody can have these resources. I just wanted to make sure that while we have a couple minutes left, wanted to see if anybody had any questions that they want to ask, if anyone wants to come off mute and ask those. I know we're pretty much coming to the end of our presentation here.
We are, and I'll bring you up on the next to the last slide, which is the framework. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, jump in.
Hi, Michael. I have a question. Going back to the public safety power shutoffs. So when they're doing those shutoffs, is there advanced communication to the community to let them know that that's going to happen? So if they needed to get somewhere where they could refrigerate medication or something like that, that would be an option to them. I'm assuming that's a plan that happens, but does that lead to other issues when those power shutoffs occur?
It's a great question. So as I understand it in California, that this policy, the PSPS, if you will allow me, is fairly well regulated. And that procedure in advance of a PSPS is established. So utility says, okay, we anticipate these conditions. It's likely that we'll have a PSPS in the next 24, 48 hours. It's not definite, but conditions are likely. So it's almost like a weather forecast. They take into consideration, obviously, the weather, but the other conditions, and they make that information available to their customers. I don't know all the ways that they do that, but the media, as well as their website and text and so forth. As they get closer, that forecast or that warning becomes more definitive. And the reason I said it was a good question is because, as I understand it, when Colorado experienced PSPS a week or so ago, that sort of warning process wasn't well documented, it wasn't practiced, and it almost just happened. There was very little warning. So that's an important opportunity for communities and states to influence their utilities on that preparation piece that I've talked about ahead of an event. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
And we're about at time. Any burning last minute questions, feel free to come off mute and ask. I also dropped a feedback form in the chat. If we would appreciate it if you fill that out just to help us improve our future webinars. And we will share this recording and slides after this webinar. So just want to check. Any more questions for Michael in our last minute or so? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for everyone who attended.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, and we'll be in touch with those resources, everybody.
Thank you all.
Have a good day.
Have a good
Bye.
day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.